Sharon is accredited with a Bachelor of Arts. She majored in Native Studies and minored in psychology. She has a certificate as a legal administrative assistant and graduated with honors in applied counseling and focusing, post-traumatic stress and complex trauma. Completed coaching in the focusing, post-traumatic stress and complex trauma and human resource management, along with various other counseling workshops and certificates. Sharon has completed 8 years as a sun dancer and continues to take part in sun dances and ceremonies throughout Manitoba and in the States, and will go wherever her gifts are needed when possible. Please stand for the blessing if you are able.
Tatsy, Creator, I am, Gishi Muskwa Squel. Whenever I hear or remember my mom, I feel so sad, and really I never acknowledged her as my first teacher in the culture. She was so good at hiding it and making it a part of the Christian faith that we went to. Every Sunday we went to church at Young United Church, and after church she would talk to us about what the teachings were, and then she would put her own spin on it. And she even came to the first ceremony that I had with my sister, and she got there first, and she checked where we were having the ceremony, and she told me, you have to cover those windows. No one can see in, and it has to be blacked out. So I said, okay, and we got it done, and she said there cannot be any outside light coming in. And I had no idea at the time that she was giving me a valuable teaching. And after that, I went to many ceremonies, many darkroom ceremonies, and there is a word for that. I just can't say it, because my parents both went to residential school, and my mom, coming from a traditional family, once they went in at an age of about 5, they weren't allowed to go home until they were 18, the age of majority. And my father's family they had already lost a lot of their traditional teachings, and they didn't participate in any of the ceremonies or anything. And they lived in town of Norrie House, so they weren't looked at as a threat, so they were day schoolers. But even in day school, something, it's not a very good place to be. Growing up, before they decided to get married, my mom said that they are not going to teach our children Cree. That's what she told my dad. And he had to agree to a lot of the things that she was asking, because it was very important for her. She did not want us kids to be reprimanded or looked down upon or threatened in any way because we knew anything of the traditional ways. And she hid it so well from us. And it wasn't until I started going to the ceremonies that I realized that I had already known a lot of the teachings that they were telling us. And my mom had taught us, but I thought, well, maybe I'm just thinking that was how it was. But there were so many more things that my mom taught us. And she always provided such a good home for us. We never, ever had to worry about where she was and if we were going to come home and be fed. And my dad always provided so well for us. Now, he never missed a day of work in his life. And he had his troubles. He drank quite a bit, but he always made sure that we were looked after. So I thank Creator for that. Because I realized later that not everybody was as lucky as we were. Not very many second-generation residential school survivors lived as good a life as we did. We were poor, but we were very rich because we had our family together, and we lived the teachings, even though I just thought they were the church teachings at the time. So with that introduction, I'd like to add my mom in there and my dad for being there for us and never letting us be afraid or be hungry or worry about if we were going to get a new set of clothes for school or a new winter coat for the winter. And I'd like to thank Creator for our lives, each and every one of us that are here today. Creator had a vision when, before anything had been created. Some people call it the Big Bang, and maybe that's exactly how it seems, because in order for his vision to work, he needed a lot of help, and he had a lot of help in spirit children. So they each agreed to be a center of each star that is in the sky, our sun, our moon, our Mother Earth, and each of the elements and the rock nations, the tree nations, the grass nations, all the four-leggeds, all those that flew, all those that swam in the sea, all the crustaceans. And everything that was before us, everything that came before us. I thank you, Creator, and I thank all the grandmothers and the grandfathers of the four directions, Mother Earth, Father Sky, Grandmother Moon, and Grandfather Sun, for without you, we could not be here. You had so much love for us that you gave of yourself so that we can be. I thank you for all the teachings and the gifts that you hold for us, and the love that you have shown us just by doing what you've done. I was taught to thank the grandmothers and the grandfathers of the 7 generations that came before me, and to pray for the 7 generations yet to come. And if we keep doing this, then we will always, always be looking out for not only us as human beings, but for our brothers and sisters in the animal world, and in the fish world, and in the flying world. We will always be looking out for everyone that comes after us. And Mother Earth needs that from us. We need to continue to look after Mother Earth in the best ways that we can. For without her, we are nothing. We will cease to be. just as we will cease to be if something happened to grandfather's son. I don't know what would happen if Grandmother Moon went off, but I'm pretty sure we wouldn't be as healthy and hearty as we are today. So thank you, Creator, for everything, all your blessings. And I pray that we continue to learn in the best ways possible to utilize the gifts that we have and the knowledge that we've obtained both here in the education institutions and at home, our traditional teachings and our familial teachings, because they're the ones that keep us going. They're the ones that support us and look after us. So thank you, Creator, again for this time together. And I pray that all the positive energies in the universe come and be a part of this night with us and take us home safely to be with our families. Legacy.
Thank you very much, Elder Sharon Peltier. We are very grateful to have you here and to give us that blessing. It was very moving. Good evening, friends. It's a pleasure to be back here at the University of Winnipeg again. My name's Josh Bijak. I'm the Executive Director of the Douglas Coldwell Leighton Foundation. I'd like to begin by saying thank you to Tracy Whalen, the Acting Dean of Arts. I'd like to say thank you to the Faculty of Arts here at the University and to the University of Winnipeg as a whole. You've been a wonderful partner for bringing us back. I'm thrilled to be in this gorgeous venue and to be here with such a fantastic program tonight. For those of you who may not know too much about the foundation, I'm going to give just a quick little background before we get started. This charity was founded over 50 years ago by Tommy Douglas. In our original letters patent from the CRA, the purpose of this charity is to educate people about governance, politics, democracy, and civic engagement. I'm proud to say over the last few years, we've worked hard to revitalize this charity to really fulfill the vision that Tommy Douglas and our founders originally had. A big part of that is this event tonight, and I'm going to tell you why. See, this was an idea that was given to me by the late Bill Blaikie. And he mentioned to me that here at the University of Winnipeg, there used to be a Knowles-Woodsworth Lecture. And he suggested that I reach out to the university because maybe we could bring that tradition back to life. I'm happy to say because of that idea, not only are we here again for the second time, with an even bigger audience, I might add, but the foundation has used it as a launch pad. Last year, we hosted 5 lectures across the country on where politics intersects with society, all on different topics at 5 different universities, 5 cities, in 5 different provinces. I'm very pleased to say next year, that number will have increased to 8. And that is largely due to the success of this event when it started, and the energy that people who attend these events then bring out into the world. We now have universities who want to partner with us because they've heard about how great this relationship can work and the kind of educational content we can bring. So again, I'm really thrilled to be back here. I'd also like to say that tonight is very special for us, and I want to say thank you so much to all of our participants tonight for the conversation that we are going to have, for the wisdom that's going to be shared. When we started to revitalize Tommy Douglas's charity, one of the things that we said we were committed to doing was bringing Indigenous stories, Indigenous leadership, and Indigenous wisdom into the foundation. And to do that, to make sure it was done respectfully and in true partnership, and that it was Indigenous-led. And I'm very pleased to say that tonight, this is the very first lecture that fulfills an element of that commitment. And so from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. And I'm extremely grateful that you're here. So before we get started, we have one more speaker who I'd like to introduce. The last time this gentleman was here, he wasn't yet the premier, but I tend to recall thinking it would be a good idea if he was. He's now done so much work. I'm pleased to say it's been a year, incredibly, and you're the most popular premier in the entire country, by far. People can't wait to meet you all over the country. So with that said, without further ado, the 25th Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew.
I just want to thank Josh for making me shy with all his kind words, and to the Douglas Coldwell Leighton Foundation for putting on this great event, and thank you, Sharon, for the prayer. And I just wanted to talk a bit about Bill, and by way of doing so, give thanks to the Blaikie family for letting us get together in your husband and your dad's name. Josh did a bit of table setting talking about the public sphere. In my mind, you can't have a public sphere without public intellectuals. And that's what Bill was. He was a true public intellectual. He wore his heart on his sleeve, absolutely a passionate person committed to social democracy and social justice and the environment and canoe trips and so many important things. But like a true intellectual, well-read, well-spoken. And any time that he was on the floor of the House of Commons or in the Legislative Assembly here, that he was going to have a very powerful argument appealing to both the head and to the heart of the people that he was speaking to. So thank you, Brenda, so much for sharing it with us all these many years. Rebecca, you're part of the legacy that he's left behind, the good work that you do both in the community and that you've done in the political world. Tessa ran my leadership campaign in 2017. Jess has been this amazing presence and support along the way. And then I guess I'm mainly here because one of his kids is a staffer in our political operation. No, obviously I'm just having some fun. Daniel, an accomplished parliamentarian and public intellectual in his own right, I would say. Having both a Red Seal and a degree in philosophy is pretty great to be able to speak to everyone that we want to bring along in our mission of progressive politics. And actually, I'm going to name drop a little bit here. I actually just borrowed a book from Daniel today. Do you want to tell everybody what the book was? Well, no, when I need a Charles Taylor book, go ask Daniel. He's going to have it in his home library. And so that's exactly what I did. Anyway, so thank you so much for sharing your dad and your husband with us. He is a great Canadian, and I think that the idea of having a robust engagement in the public sphere with ideas that include a strong Indigenous perspective, an important legacy for him, but an important contribution to the country. So thanks so much. And for our, that was a little golf clap, nice one. I just looked over there and I saw Niigaan doing this, so caught my eye. That's okay. This panel is amazing. I can say to a person, I've known each of them for many years and respect them all tremendously. Chantal, who is our moderator tonight, is somebody that I've prayed with in a sweat and seen around many friend and family and community activities in the city here and at MMF assemblies and all sorts of different things like that, and is an accomplished writer and academic. And so I think just really brings a really strong Métis perspective onto traditional Indigenous existence and nationhood and all these really important conversations. And so to see her going to be the person to steer the conversation, I think is a perfect choice. Katherena Vermette, I've known long enough that I still think of her as Kate, which is going back a few years. And I can say, like, having seen the journey of Katherena coming up here in Winnipeg and then emerging onto the national literary scene and all the accolades and tremendous success, all those plaudits and applause that are delivered could not happen to a better, more deserving person. And then Niigaan, in addition to being like a rousing applauder at public events, like, you started it one way or the other, that's right. He is an important figure in terms of the academic scene. I don't want to tip my hand too much in terms of what I think of all the columnists at the Free Press, but I'll say he's one of the top ones, right? I've been on his podcast along with Dan Lett many times now, and we always have a good time when we're talking. And I just think that the contributions from a cultural perspective are super important. One of the things I really like about Niigaan too is that if you ever get a chance to see him instruct a university course, I highly recommend you do it. He is one of the best in-class instructors that you will ever come across. And so there's all the stuff that we see in the public eye, really, really important, but helping to nourish the young minds that are with you is a super, super powerful legacy that you have. And then my friend Sheila, we used to work together across the street at the CBC. And to see the important work that Sheila did to put the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls on the provincial and also the national conversation was super, super important. Like, it's tough to remember that this is the way things were. Like, when was that, 15 or so years ago? But that was not necessarily a topic that the mainstream wanted to engage with. And yet Sheila was probably, if not the first, one of the first reporters who were pushing those stories and asking the questions and forcing that conversation to be had. And so when you reflect now on the national inquiry, the calls to justice, the search of the landfill, the advocacy of the families, I think that we do have to recognize the super important role that Sheila played in that. And so over the years since, and seeing her evolution into a political leader and an author, I would say I've always been impressed, but I've never been surprised. I always knew that you were on the track to do great things. So what am I doing here other than delaying you from hearing these wonderful intellectuals engaging with the important public sphere? I'm just here to say thanks. To me, this is one of the ways that this province that I love so much, Manitoba, this is one of the ways that we lead. We have people like this here, and I don't think we're bragging too much as Manitobans if we say it's because of voices like this that our province, our part of the world, is a true leader when it comes to the revitalization of Indigenous nations and the conversation about reconciliation and what that can mean for the future of us living together in a good way. So I'm just here to say thanks for everything you do. I look forward to listening to you.
Thank you, Premier. It's really wonderful that you're here. And I know in the last, especially in the last couple years of his life, Dad really appreciated the relationship and would have been so pumped to see you now in your role and rooting for you all the way. So it's really, on behalf of the family, thank you for joining us again this year, even busier than you were the last time around. So, and thank you everybody for being a part of tonight. I think it's just, a room full of superstars. We're going to have a conversation with superstars. And like Wab said, I think Manitoba, because of voices like yours, really is leading the way and hopefully changing the path forward for a better tomorrow and getting folks in the rest of Canada to think about things in a different way as well. So I'm just really excited to be here, fangirling a little bit about the panel, and thank very, very grateful to be here tonight with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much to the family for this, obviously. And thank you so much, Premier, for all those words and all you do. The work you've accomplished in this past year has been really amazing. Your caucus, terrific. It was blowing everybody away. I just got to say that. So we're gonna move forward now to this panel discussion. And so it's my job to introduce our moderator tonight, the absolutely fantastic Dr. Chantal Fiola. Chantal is Michif, Red River Métis, with family from St. Laurent and St. Anne, Manitoba, and is a registered citizen of the Manitoba Métis Federation. Dr. Fiola is Associate Vice President of Indigenous Engagement here at the University of Winnipeg, where she also maintains an appointment as Associate Professor in the Department of Urban and Inner City Studies. Chantal is also an award-winning author, including her second book, Returning to Ceremony, Spirituality in Manitoba Métis Communities. Currently, she is a project director on a 3-year SSHRC study titled Expressions of Métis Spirituality and Religion Across the Homeland. Dr. Fiola is part of the Circle of Editors for Pawatamic, Journal of Métis Thinkers, a board member of Two-Spirit Manitoba, and a founding member of the Two-Spirit Michif Local. Thank you so much, Dr. Chantal Fiola. Please come on up here and introduce our panel.
Bonjour Nindinawe Magani Zagate Kwe Indigenous Bijune Dodem, Michifendao. Miigwech, Elder Sharon, for sharing your recollections of your mother and embodying how to maintain and embed Indigenous values, knowledge, and wisdom despite colonialism that might be surrounding us. And for being so thorough in your reminder of our relationships with all of creation. Miigwech to the Premier for spending some time with us, to the Blaikie family, to Rebecca for bringing wonderful remarks from the wonderful Blaikie family, to Josh and the Douglas Coldwell Leighton Foundation for partnering with the University of Winnipeg to host this year's Blaikie-Knowles-Woodsworth Lecture. I have the pleasure of being your moderator. I was deeply honored to have been approached, and when they let me know who they wanted to approach, I eagerly accepted. I'm a fan of each of these fine humans over here, and I'm also fortunate to work closely with them. So, as was mentioned, Sheila North just very recently became Executive Director of External Indigenous Relations here at the university. So we are going to be increasingly working side by side moving forward. I've known Kate for about a decade. We met through mutual friends, became fast friends ourselves. Now our children have play dates. It's lovely. Niigaan, I think I've known you and your family for closer to 15 years. I'm trying to remember if it was through the Three Fires Midday Society or if we first met at But either way, we're relatives through the Midday Lodge. But we've also had occasion to be on panels together and contribute chapters to books together. So these fine accomplished people have long bios, so hold your applause to the end. Sheila North is from Bunibonibee Cree Nation, a former Grand Chief of Manitoba, Kiiwetinowi a journalist, storyteller, and most recently, she was Director for the International Commission on Missing Persons Canada. Today, she works at the University of Winnipeg as ED. Sheila is the author of the memoir, My Privilege, My Responsibility. She also co-produced the film 1200 Plus on the topic of MMIW with Leonard Ukir. The film's accessible through the Winnipeg Film Group. Sheila continues to work with survivors and families of MMIW, residential schools, and those looking for answers to missing loved ones and unmarked graves. She also works with her home community on development. She's passionate about working for her people and is recognized for her efforts on building bridges between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities during her work with media and her time as MKO Grand Chief. She's a mother of 2, cookum of 1, and the daughter of a residential school survivor and day school survivor. Katherena Vermette is Michif, a Michif Red River Métis writer from Treaty 1 territory, the heart of the Métis Nation in Winnipeg. Born in Winnipeg, her Michif roots on her paternal side run deep in St. Boniface, St. Norbert, and beyond. Her maternal side is Mennonite from the Altona and Rosenfeld area, also Treaty 1. In 2013, her first book, North End Love Songs, won the Governor General's Literary Award for Poetry. Her novels, The Break, The Strangers, and The Circle were all national bestsellers and won multiple literary awards. Vermette's work for children and young adults includes the picture book, The Girl and the Wolf, and graphic novel series, A Girl Called Echo. She holds a Master of Fine Arts from the University of British Columbia and an honorary Doctor of Letters from the University of Manitoba. She lives with her kids, fur and human, in a cranky old house within skipping distance of the temperamental Red River. How poetic. Niigaanwewidam Sinclair is Anishinaabe from St. Peter's, Little Peguis, and a professor at the University of Manitoba. He's a regular commentator on Indigenous issues on CTV, CBC, and APTN, and his written work can be found in the pages of the Exile edition of Native Canadian fiction and drama, newspapers like The Guardian, and online with CBC Books Canada Writes. Niigaan is the co-editor of the award-winning Manitowapo Aboriginal Writings from the Land of Water and Centering Anishinaabe Studies, Understanding the World Through Stories, and is the editorial director of the Debwe series with Portage and Main Press. He obtained his BA in Education at UWinnipeg before completing an MA in Native and African American Literatures at the University of Oklahoma and a PhD in First Nations and American Literatures from the University of British Columbia. His latest book is Winnipeg, Visions of Canada from an Indigenous Center. Please help me welcome our guests as they make their way up here. All right, so is this on? Can you hear me? Okay, now that I've read your very impressive bios, I'm hoping to get us truly started by relying on Indigenous protocols for introduction. So could you share a little bit about who you are in creation so that we can all figure out how we're related and connected?
I didn't want to sit here. First chair. Okay. Anin, Buju, Tanchi. Chikwanakwaduk Nadishnakas, Zangigabawek Medina Dishnakas, Magisi Dodam, Rivière Rouge, Winnipeg, Nidunjaba. Merci. So I just shared I walk with 2 names. I am Eagle Clan. That's new. I didn't know that before. I'm quite impressed that I got the eagle. It feels very rock star. I'm born and raised in Winnipeg, born specifically in the North End and also in St. Vital and Windsor Park. My family has been in and around St. Vital and St. Norbert since before it was a city, and they just kind of hung out there for generations, and still do. And my mom's family is from Altona, very different families, but my Mennonite relatives are in and around Rosenfeld and Altona. I'm related to Friesens, Giesbrecks, Schraders. Oh, I heard some nodding. I get it. There's some Weebs, sorry. And on the Michif side, I have a lot of Rivards, because we're all cousins, and cousins married each other, I guess. And there's also some Saint Denis and Oh, Saint Germain. Right. Ooh, that's me. Thank you.
Danse, Sheila North is Niigaanwewidam. I'm thankful to be here. My name is Sheila North from the Bunbonabee Cree Nation. But first I want to thank, as elders walking out, for her opening prayer and her thoughts and sharing her family story with all of us. And it set the tone for me because I have a very similar story as you, Elder. So thank you again, and thank you for all the welcoming remarks, and for the Blaikie family for being here, and Premier Wab for being here as well, and your kind words. You made me blush too, so thank you very much for that. Wigasko isquel win niki minigwin. Mogis to not den egi be minigoyan bigo. I was given the name Wigasko isquel, which in English is sweetgrass woman, which is kind of cool, I think, too. And it was given to me, and I didn't seek it out. I didn't ask for it. I didn't offer, anything to get it. So I guess in a way it was gifted to me. And it was gifted to me at a very difficult time. I was going through a very, very challenging time in my life, and I'll just say it's one of the elections that I was in and lost. And I got very sick afterwards, very sick. As soon as I landed from Vancouver, I went straight to the hospital because that's how sick I was. And they said I had pneumonia. I was beginning pneumonia. And it was 2 weeks straight. I could barely breathe. I could barely talk, everything. And anyhow, I'll fast forward. A good close friend of mine took me to a healer, and he did a series of ceremony and songs, and I didn't grow up in any of this. This is all new to me. I've never been to anything like this before. And he talked to me a bit about what he saw and what he felt. And while he was talking, he said, "Your grandma is up here with us," and kind of like this. And he was describing standing there looking at us, and she's calling you sweetgrass woman. And when he said that, he said, she wants you to offer rice and raisins when we're done. And when he said that, I knew that was my grandmother, because that's a treat that she gave us when we were little kids. So there was no way that elder or that healer would have known that. So I knew that it was a name that she was calling me. So I accepted it. I've learned what it means more and more, and it has to do with the mind, body, and spirit. Leading as one, and in Cree, the translation is someone who makes crooked things straight. So that's where I recently learned I come from, and I guess I've always come from that. But I did grow up in church. I went to church on Wednesdays, Fridays, and twice on Sundays. Impressive, I know. And all summer long, we'd go to camp meetings. I was a regular under the pews, sleeping as a kid. My dad was a pastor, my mom, always supportive. And I'm very impressed with my mom and dad with how they were able to raise us coming from where they came from in the poverty that they lived in. I too was hungry or needed anything. I was always privileged. That's why I named my book My Privilege and My Responsibility. Because I knew privilege was always like a interesting word, but I knew I was privileged, and I feel like I had to give back to our community responsibly. So in a nutshell, that's who I am.
I'm a recovering grade 9's teacher. That's really what I am. I kind of peaked teaching grade 9, it's just been kind of downhill since then. I came from St. Peter's, so my family comes from the displaced community, which is now known as Pegas First Nation. We are the original Pegas people, and those of us that went for a short while and then lost our status to come back, and then gained our status back in the 1980s. Most of you probably know my father. That's where I have been most of today, is spending time one thing that's very profound to me is that the pathway that I have walked, as whether it be a teacher, as a writer, a professor, as a public person on CBC, or whether it be just as a father or a brother or an uncle, and all these different terms that I carry, I walk in a lot of footsteps, and I think sometimes, my father would be the first to tell you that it was dozens and dozens of women that made him possible, and it was particularly my granny, it was my great granny, but everybody called her Granny Kate, Kate Simard, or Katherena Vermette, who took my father in when he was abandoned by my grandfather because he could not parent. He was suddenly found to have 4 children under the age of 5, and he was a single parent when my grandmother passed away, Florence Simard. And it was my Granny Kate, really. So if I were to say my location, I am Granny Kate's great-grandson, because it is, she's the only reason that you get a Murray Sinclair. She's the only reason. And it's really because she had this profound understanding of creation, this really profound commitment to her family. And if it wasn't for her, and of course my great-grandfather too, Henry James Sinclair, who I'm named after, James is my middle name, it is their fierce and undying love for their family, and that really brought us all the different parts that make us who we are today. And in these really delicate times, these really fragile times where you really realize the value of life, you really realize, or you come to an understanding that it's really love at the end. I think Wob writes about that in his book. And we had Wob at the we had Wob at the hospital the other day visiting my father, and it is really true what Wob wrote in his book, and I've returned to your book a few times, Wob, that really at the end of it, it's just love, and you sort of understand where love comes from. And really where it comes from is my Granny Kate, which you'll never hear about. You'll never see a parade in her honor. But she is the absolute reason that I am here today. And I think about her a lot these days, and my father talks about her that's the number one person he talks about in these moments of his life that he wants us to remember, is how much she meant to all of us. And she's been gone now for decades, but she is really the reason that I'm here. So I situate her tonight. So miigwech.
Miigwech. Miigwech for sharing a little bit about who you are, your family, your relationships. I sometimes think about what mainstream society would look like if these were practices that everybody participated in. So if instead of relying on fancy titles and positions, we cut to the heart of it, which at the foundation is love, and we were able to take some time to connect and realize how we're connected, how we're related, and how much, I think it would be harder to be mean to one another if we did that in everything that we participated in. So we've been brought together tonight by a partnership that values the importance of faith, spirituality, and compassion as underpinnings of social democracy. Social democracy is considered a practical middle course between capitalism and socialism, aims to use democratic collective action to promote freedom and equality in the economy, and opposes inequality and oppression that are necessities in capitalism. I got that from Wikipedia. Yet, as aspirational as social democracy aims to be, it too can leave a colonial paradigm firmly entrenched, depending on whose voices, ideas, and ideals get amplified. Thankfully, we have opportunities like tonight to center Indigenous paradigms, worldviews, and perspectives. What are your thoughts on the relationship between Indigenous paradigms or worldviews and social democracy? We don't have to go in order.
We don't have to go in order.
Okay, do I get the look here? I get the look? I was just talking about this last night. So, actually I was, believe it or not. There's a wonderful art gallery called CPAC or CPAC. It's down on Hargrave. Anyways, it's an amazing art gallery, and we had this really robust and really amazing discussion on Edward Said last night, and I was asked to speak on Edward Said, so there's Dr. Reimer over there. I pulled out my good post-colonial theory from back in the day, And like I'll be honest, like UW program, best program I've ever seen in the country. Like I've been a lot of places. I would say that the honors English program here with Dr. Reimer and all the different people that have built that over the years, better than my PhD program at UBC. It was that good. It was so significant. But anyways, we did a session on Edward Said. So what we're talking about is how colonialism is the most uncreative thing in the world. Like it happens, it's a template that kind of goes everywhere. And so, and the problem, of course, is that we often obsess ourselves with the obstacles that we face as Indigenous peoples. And we have to remember that colonialism is just yet another thing that we've had to deal with. Far more challenging has been the mosquitoes, or winter, or hunger, or atrophy, or fear. Like really, to be honest, like colonialism is a challenge. It's something that we should talk about, and it's something that we should focus on. But the fact is that we have always been people who have been committed to the ideals that ultimately have made this country, period. And I know I want to give my respect to Tommy Douglas, but he didn't invent healthcare. That's an Indigenous idea. Indigenous peoples came up with the idea that we care for everybody first. We feed the elders first, we feed the children, then we feed those who cannot feed themselves, and then finally we feed the women and the men, and then the last person to eat is supposed to be the Ogamar, the leader. So the fact is that you can really see that, and there's a reason, I talked about him twice now, and I won't do this after this, but there's a reason that WAB and other Indigenous leaders are successful and popular is because they think about others as much as themselves, and the rule in our community is that you have to make sure everybody is fed before you. So imagine the mayor of cities or the premiers of provinces or Justin Trudeau eats last. What would that look like? And ultimately, that's what Indigenous leadership is meant to do. That's what social democracy is meant to be, which is another Indigenous idea. When the Europeans came here, there was no free speech. They couldn't say anything about the king or the pope who sent them over. They absolutely could not say anything about, the roles that they were playing, or they had any say in things like religion, or there was no free speech. There was no say. There was no absolutely any role for people, even like powerful women. And they looked at our societies and they saw that the grandmothers were in charge. The grandmothers were the Supreme Court. And yeah, there were spokespeople, but it was the grandmothers who made the decision on what unanimity looked like, what the unanimousness. So they're like the Supreme Court. And so we get social democracy because of Indigenous peoples, period. And if we were left up to the vices only of Europeans, we would have the 1%. We would have the systems of feudal systems. We would have the system of a sole male in charge of everything. The fact is that we have a social democracy because of Indigenous nations who have this crazy idea that everybody can sit in a circle and share our ideas, and we sit together until the grandmothers say this is the decision. And that's what social democracy looks like. We can call it majority. We can also call it a one voice, one vote system. But ultimately, it's about collectivity, that the community is as important as the individual. And so when I think about that social democracy, I think about us just returning to who we are fundamentally as Indigenous peoples, but also how we taught the newcomers to live in this place.
Well, first of all, hi. I'm not an academic. I'll never speak like our dear friends here. I speak in plain language, and I also, I try to speak out of love and not, anything else too. So I say that to say this, that I think, our elder here captured what I see and what I think of that topic. Because, even though I grew up, and a few of us grew up in the church, I feel that I was never separated from my culture. And when I went to first time in Brandon as a student at the Assiniboine Community College, it was the first time that I felt that tension between people that practice Indigenous spirituality, and not. And so I was put in boxes where, I felt less than by people that practiced that. And I was confused, and I was hurt, and I was angry. But an elder, the late Isaac Bolio, told me that because he was an elder in residence at the time, he said that there's a difference between culture and spirituality. And he says that's what you have to keep in mind when you're in these spaces. And that has helped me tremendously, so much in the years ahead up until now. And I value that teaching. But there is, much like what happened in colonialism, we've been separated by many things as Indigenous people. The leadership, as people, we've been pitted against each other in a lot of ways. But I also see that we've also caught on to the system and the scheme as well. A chief told me one time, you know, we've only been here as Canada is for the last 150 plus years, and we're already catching on. We already know the system, so much so that we have an Indigenous premier in Manitoba. We know what's going on. We know how to get in, and we know where to go, and it takes us a while, and sometimes you don't see the reasoning behind everything, but Creator had the plan. Creator gave us the gifts that we need to exist in multiple universes and worlds. And the other thing that that comes to mind too is, you know, an elder told me a while ago, and he's from the States. And this is the part that I don't want to be controversial, but I feel like it has something that we need to heal from that I've never heard before. And he said that, you know, during the time when Europeans came to our country, our women were the leaders, and they still are. When I go to community gatherings, it's the women telling everyone what to do. It's the women guiding, you know, the organization. And even though the leaders sometimes, a lot of times, it's the male leadership that is being honored and that is the front line, you know, for different reasons. But this male elder told me that during that time when Europeans came, he thinks and he sees that, in a way, that men saw the need for power, or saw that there was a level of power that they can attain that they didn't have before. And it was so attractive to them that they prostituted our sovereignty in some ways to have that power. And I'm not saying that's gospel, but that was something that I think he was trying to help me understand how we got all upside down and how our society and our community got messed up, because our levels of power and our places in society as Indigenous people were being interfered with. And in some ways we allowed it. And some days we go with it, but it's not our way. Our way is known by our people, and at the end of the day, at the end of our lives, we get it. Even my dad, who was a staunch Christian, he grew up, you know, as an altar boy, and he told me about stories about shaking tent ceremonies and things like that. So he saw that in his community when he was a little boy, and he raised us up in church. He taught us the Bible, but at the end of his life, his nephew that he was close with, but his nephew practiced the traditional way. He called him from his deathbed, among other people. He called lots of people at his deathbed, but among other people, and he said to him, we didn't always agree and we didn't always see eye to eye, but I understand you now, and I believe what you believe, and I understand. So at the end of his life, he acknowledged that, and I don't want to wait till the end of my life to acknowledge that part of it, but I feel like at the end of it all, though, is Creator gives us specific callings and places to work from and to exist from, and it's all different when you look at the world. Creator made some people Muslim, create some people Buddhist, and it's our duty as whatever we're assigned to be faithful to that, and that's what I've come up with when I was thinking about your question.
Wow, our parents are really in the room today, aren't they? I just feel everyone kind of floating around here. democracy on Wikipedia. Just to be sure. I think I knew what it meant, but I just wanted to be sure. But it is that idea that that it is the very indigenous idea, and is very much from our nations where we took care of one another. We had to. We were in close proximity with one another, and always living and relying on one another. And the fact that we didn't murder each other all the time is kind of cool. We must have had laws. We must have had some sort of an agreements, because I can't. I have way too many children, and I'm really surprised we haven't murdered each other in our house. It's really hard to work together. But it's true, and I was thinking of this. I too have the kind of father who never missed a day of work in his life. That's not true. He did actually finally call in sick one time when he was something like 55 years old, sick with pneumonia. Had to drive to work in a blizzard, and he passed out in the car because he was so sick. And then he turned around and said, "Okay, I guess I'll call in sick." Because that's what we come from, right? We come from that intense work ethic that partially is because of fear, partially is that need to perform goodness, to make up for, the brownness that, everyone was using against them. But the other part was that's what you do for your family. That's how you work, and you feed your children, and you get everyone taken care of, and it's essential. My dad is also the kind of person who now he's slowing down finally well into his 70s, but he never, throughout my childhood, he was never sitting down when the sun was out. He was never sitting down until bedtime, because he was always working for his family. When he wasn't making money, he was, working on doing whatever he could. Building a garage, fixing someone's door, fixing, some part of the house, because he's a handy person. He still has us all in rotation, like it's me and my cousins and my auntie, and of course my big old cranky house. He's always helping, and this is the model I've had in my life of like, why not, if you can, find what you can give to the world, and give it, and keep giving it, and then give it again, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to look after each other. And this is what I was taught from him. He was taught with his family, and so on down to, just very recently, like in my great-grandparents' age, we were road allowance folks, and we were, literally living and hopefully not starving and hopefully surviving somehow. I mean, they did make it for many of them. Well, not all of them now, but they made it, and they got together by working with one another. We're so close to those starving years, in those times when we literally had to physically rely on one another. And I think in so many ways, emotionally, we still do so much.
There's lots to unpack there. Thinking about how Niigaan maybe facetiously said, mosquitoes are more of an inconvenience than colonialism.
I just said they're harder.
They're harder. But thinking about like the insidiousness of colonialism to the point where collectively we forget the indigenous underpinnings of something like social democracy. But hopefully with the foundation and opportunities like this, we can remind folks. I remember hearing stories about like the fathers of Confederation in the States sitting in Haudenosaunee meetings and witnessing clan mothers, and that, like Niigaan was saying, they were the ones who were calling the shots, who would raise up chiefs, and if chiefs were no longer representing their people or doing a good job, it would be the clan mothers who would depose them. And how Sheila's talking about like essentially the combination of colonialism and its reliance on patriarchy and misogyny, flipping everything on its head to the point where now we have this epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit folks. Getting back to the values of faith and spirituality and compassion as underpinnings of social democracy, Can you share with us a little bit about your own journey with culture, faith, and spirituality, and ways that those have been influenced by your family, community, and nation?
Want me to go first this time? I think we're playing nice here. You go first, I'll go first. Yeah. I think, I value my background. I value now. I didn't appreciate it back then, going to church the whole time. But it taught me a lot of things, and it taught me to be a good listener. I probably could have stood an hour if you wanted to talk an hour, elder. So it taught me a lot of skills, but also a lot of life lessons. But I also know that it caused me a lot of heartache too, because the kids in my community, the ones that didn't go to church necessarily, they would make fun of us a lot for being church people, church kids. And throughout my whole life, up until a few years ago, nobody makes fun of me for being Christian anymore. But I have had to deal with that. I've had people commenting and, just ignorant statements about being a Christian and growing up Christian, and somehow I was colonized because of that. And for a long time, it hurt, and I was resentful for that. But it doesn't bother me anymore, because I know that we're all on different parts of our journey. We all react differently with the things that we've grown up with and the things that we were taught in our lives. And I feel stronger for the things that I have gone through and the things that I have seen and experienced. I can't say that I've had perfect responses to situations. I'm not a good arguer. I say the stupidest things when I'm in an argument. But I think my spirituality is based on my own relationship with Creator. I pray throughout the day. I pray when I wake up. I pray when I was sitting here. Having a grandson now makes me think of the world a lot differently too. When I had my 2 children, I'm blessed to be a mother, and I'm blessed that I was able to provide for them and to care for them. But I felt like I was in survival mode when I was a mother. But now with my grandson, I don't have to be the everyday caregiver. I feel like I can see into the future better, and I want to make a better future for my grandson. I don't want him to feel less than anyone, ever. And I'm sure that that's how our grandparents thought about us, and even further back in the generations. That didn't always happen, but here we are, and I think that as a grandmother, I feel more responsible to the future than I've ever felt. And so that makes me tolerant and makes me more forgiving of ignorance, and more patient, and knowing when to get out of the way. As Wab mentioned, I poured my heart and soul, and I feel like I still do in my head and my heart, the issue around missing and murdered women. And not because I wanted to, but because it became a personal calling. But I also know I don't need to be at the forefront all the time. There's other people and other actors that have to carry the mantle, that have to carry things forward, and I'm grateful for the little parts that I get to play. And so I feel blessed.
I got the nod. I too feel blessed. I love that. I do think, I agree with that idea that especially as we get older, we realize we don't have to do everything. And I love that. I love that there are so many young, energetic folks who are coming up behind us who know so much more than we do, so much faster. And I'm just really enjoying auntyhood. So I really feel for that. Gosh, I feel like we're talking about our childhoods a lot. I grew up in the church. I grew up in an evangelical church and then a Mennonite Brethren church. My mother, who's Mennonite, came from a very different kind of church, but insisted on infusing Christianity into our lives. My dad's family is very staunchly Catholic, and I was always jealous because I didn't get to do the Catholic stuff, which is super cool, compared to the evangelical stuff, which less cool. But kind of coming into my teenage years, my stepfather, who's no longer with us, he introduced us to ceremony. He was also a Christian man, training to be a preacher at the time, a minister. But he took us to our first sweats and our first ceremonies, and that's where I really felt I felt truth for the first time. I am not in any way a Christian anymore, and arguably I wasn't at the time. I just kind of was it was something and a teaching and education I appreciated, but it never spoke to me in that way, where anything earth-based and kind of connected to this world felt like it was the purest form of knowledge. And there is something in that that's always carried me through, many different teachings where you get down to the root of something. It's really just about not only taking care of one another, but taking care of the earth that's constantly taking care of us. And it's always this symbiotic, relationship between all of us. I do think, having kind of wandered through a lot of different belief systems in my life, that at the root of them all is that idea of love. When you take away the institutions and you take away all of the everything else, when what people are trying to get at is love and connection and belonging, and that's something that I think is so very present when you get into ceremony, and just that working with one another, and deep reflection in solitariness, but also, again, that needing one another to do everything is just such a beautiful communion with not only each other, but also with the earth.
I was trying to think of where to start, but I guess I'll just start. The definition of there's many definitions of Anishinaabe. There's nothing that Indigenous peoples do better than disagree. Okay, that's like our number one thing we do. But especially Anishinaabe people. But one of the most profound interpretations of the term Anishinaabe, the endonymic ethnonym that we use to describe ourselves, that's what people use. It's the first beginning of autonomy and sovereignty, when you can articulate who you are and you therefore have a creation story. For Anishinaabe, William Warren defined Anishinaabe as the spontaneous people. And he's wrote in the late 19th century, wrote during a time of genocide, but was particularly writing that not just for others, but for a future Anishinaabe like myself to never forget who we are. So let's just analyze that phrase for a minute, the spontaneous people. You're all spontaneous at different times of your life. You're being spontaneous right now because you're having a thought, right? When we get spontaneous, we make the decision to take somebody flowers, for example, to go somewhere, or to make a decision about something. We are only spontaneous with cause. That means that we meet something, we see something, we are exposed to something, and then therefore we become spontaneous. We make a decision, we change, we grow, we think. And so that is the epitome of Anishinaabe. So what makes Anishinaabe is that we experience, and that we see, and that we taste, and that we learn, and that we are exposed to. So what does that mean? That means that every time we met the Cree people, we were like, oh, we learned something more about being Anishinaabe because of the way we interrelate, or we traded gifts, or maybe they do ceremonies a little bit differently, so that we learned another way we can do our ceremonies. Same thing could be said about all the different people we warred with, the Haudenosaunee people who we warred with for hundreds of years. Every time we encountered them, we learned something about ourselves, and sometimes those weren't pleasant gifts. Those are like the ugly sweaters of creation, like ugly sweaters are awful things, but you realize sometimes they have profound teachings when your auntie gets it for you from going to Florida, you know what I mean? It was the same way when we encountered Christianity. When we encountered Jesus, the Blackcoats showed up and said, hey man, listen, we have a story about this guy, he's inspiring, he makes He inspires millions, hundreds of millions of people. He can walk on water. One day he died, came back to life. And we were like, that's a cool story. We got stories about a guy that can transform into a rabbit. We got a story about a guy that has multiple genders. We got stories about guys that can like transform and live forever. And he's half spirit, half human, called Wayne-Boju. And we were like, maybe like Wayne-Boju and Jesus, maybe they're like the same guy, or maybe they're cousins. And it was the Blackcoats who said, our story is the only one of truth. And, oh, by the way, cut your hair and burn the drums. It was the Blackcoats who introduced that it's or. But we are a people of and. So there was no, like, end of Anishinaabe when we encountered Christianity. The problem with Christianity is never Christianity, it's the Christians who don't often know their own tradition. And I can promise you that Jesus would have been 100% on board for reconciliation or wearing an orange shirt. Or Jesus would be here talking about love. That's what Jesus is supposed to talk about. And I'm not even a Christian, I know that. Like my little Sunday school lessons that I can tell you. So let's go back to Granny Kate for a second. Granny Kate was a staunch Catholic, and she raised my father, Murray Sinclair, to be a priest. And in fact, when he said that he was going to come to the University of Winnipeg, she cried for 3 days. Put that on your pamphlets. Because he wasn't going to enter the, seminary or the whatever, to become a priest, my point. So, because Granny Kate wanted my father to become a priest, she did not see an irreconcilable difference about being Anishinaabe and being a priest. She actually saw that as a benefit to his life. And so my father has that sensibility. I mean, we often say my dad is like this Mr. Reconciliation or whatever. His first teachings are as much Catholic as they are Anishinaabe, because he would be picking medicines with Granny, having medicines on his head, especially when he had migraines and headaches, spending time out in the bush with healers, but he would also go to church. And so you have to realize that, when we talk about spirituality, and this is what Chantal's work is so profound and interesting, our traditional people did not see this irreconcilable difference. What they saw was Anishinaabe. And, oh, by the way, everything about Anishinaabe is also queer. So this is where we get into the real profound challenges, I think, because I think that oftentimes there are forces within Christianity that don't study what Jesus actually says, which is that we should love people and we should care about people. And I think of nothing more profound that's in the creation story. And Pat Niigaanwewidam, who's my language teacher, she says, whenever you're stuck, go back to the creation story, because the creation story will always teach you everything you need to know about life. And so I always go back to the creation story. You know what the number one lesson of the creation story? If you're sitting in a lodge and you're sitting with an elder and they tell you the creation story, first off, there'll always be 2 or 3 of them, because there's never one person that can tell you the full creation story. So that in itself is already bucking and rejecting an idea of mono-narrative, that you have to have multiple narratives at work at all times. Hello, Bakhtin. There's Dr. Reimer. You like that reference there? Okay, there you go. That was a little literary reference for you. But then on top of that, the second line that's said in the story, or the very first line of the said after you realize that there's multiple tellers, is that this story is not meant to cancel out other stories. This story is meant to enrich your understanding of all the other stories, Buddhism, Christianity, Sikhism, Islam, all these different other stories. Our story is meant to not cancel, but then to help us understand that all of us are viewing a tree from a different perspective, and that we all have something important to say. That's why Anishinaabe have to maintain sovereign and autonomous, because if we don't bring our gifts, meaning our perspective of spontaneity, which is different than everybody else's, then we fail to bring our gifts to creation, because we need to help others become spontaneous and different and enriched as well. So we have to maintain our autonomy and sovereignty as separate people, but at the same time deeply related, which is why Anishinaabe doesn't just mean the Anishinaabe people, the Ojibwe people, but it also means human. It can be 2 truths at the same time.
That's beautiful. It reminds me of one of the first teachings that I remember learning when I started going to the Midday Lodge, right along these lines, is that all creation stories are true, and it's fundamentally a teaching about respecting the various teachings and cultures and peoples that exist. It also made me think of the late Ron Indian Mandamin, a beautiful spirit who shared so much. He was what we might call Two-Spirit, chief of the Midday Lodge in Shoal Lake. He one time shared like a 1-hour portion of the Midday creation story featuring what we might think of as Two-Spirit folks. And it's not something that a lot of other folks carry as a result of the legacy of colonization. Oh, there's so much to unpack here. So, like, Indigenous relationships with spirituality, with institutionalized religion, getting through all the layers, and understandings of syncretism that have been passed down to us through the generations, like this recognition and this weaving together of like foundational elements of Indigenous cosmology and spirituality with teachings from Jesus, you know. But if we can wipe away the institutionalism and the dogma, what's at the center, like Sheila noted, is love, you know. This is I can go on and on about that. This is my area. Okay, so getting back to the values of faith, spirituality, and compassion, continuing this thread, can you tell us a little bit more about the ways that faith and spirituality inform your work in life? And maybe as a place to start, you can share a bit about how that influenced your writing of your books. So Kate Vermette's The Real Ones, Sheila North's My Privilege, My Responsibility, and Niigaanwewidam Visions of Canada from an Indigenous Center.
All right, it's me. Sorry, what was the question? I was just like, oh, books, yay.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the ways that faith, spirituality, and culture informed your book and your broader work in life?
God, you ask tough questions, which I appreciate, and I love spending time with them, thinking of them. I'll talk specifically about this book, not to plug it, but just to give me a grounding space to start. But I did actually, one of the threads that I had going on in the book was the idea of ancient pottery practices. Really looking through, you know, our pre-contact spaces, which I find so, when I started learning about those practices from our very, you know, dear friend and compatriot, Casey Adams, I felt so deeply connected to that idea of who we were pre-contact, and who we come from still. That, you know, we had these very basic practices of drawing clay from the riverbanks and creating vessels in harmony with one another. And all of these, like just the simple act of making a vessel is again a community action, is again something that we do for a necessity, for our literal survival. Like you need something to, you know, scoop up the water in order to drink the water, in order to, you know, not die. And it was something so basic, but also so beautiful. And our pottery practices were also adorned artistically. You know, there was absolutely no need to adorn these things and get all fancy with them, but people, you know, have been doing that for tens of thousands of years. They've just been making their life and their collective life as beautiful as they possibly could. And that's something I think as an art practice, as something that I try to bring into my life whenever possible. I think it's always searching for the beauty, searching for the ease. What I tend to do in my work is talk about things that might not typically seem beautiful. But I think that the goal, particularly of poetry, but also arguably I would argue that fiction is really just long-winded poetry. But it's really the looking deeper and finding the beauty. And there's beauty to be had anywhere, you know. There's definitely beauty to be had in this city. There's definitely beauty to be had in the North End. And all of that kind of stems from the people that are there. Also, you know, the natural, beautiful earth that we are blessed to come from, our dynamic and life-giving rivers that surround us. But it is so easy to find if we look for it. And I think if I had a belief system, which, I mean, probably I do, somewhere in there. It depends on the day. It'll change tomorrow. But it's really always just looking for that light, which, and beauty is nothing if not love. Beauty is just love. You know, what it is subjective to the person viewing it. It is, you know, always ever changing, and it's just something that makes you feel something. And what is that if not love?
How does spirituality influence the work, like the writing?
Yeah, so your most recent book in particular as a place to start, and then maybe your broader work in life.
I don't know, this book started with me just being upset at the stream of Toronto reporters that came in for the weekend and said that we suck. That was really what drove my inspiration for this book. I was just sick and tired of Toronto reporters coming in for a coffee break and then just saying we were either, well, they mostly said we sucked for about 10 years, and now then suddenly we became the best. And then the most recent one was they're kind of quirky. That was the decision of Toronto, is that we're quirky. I'll just say this, like I'm, you know, when you were talking today about spirituality, so much about our spirituality is just tangible, material things. And what I mean by that is like, there's no conversion to Anishinaabe. Like, no matter, you can't just convert on a Sunday because you decided that you saw something or felt something or whatever. You are Anishinaabe by doing the work. That's why, you know, Anishinaabe is a verb. It's not a noun, it's a verb, and you're becoming, you're in this constant series of becoming. And so that's where the spontaneity gets in, right? Or if you look at any of the other definitions of Anishinaabe, the good people, the people that are lowered, you know, like these are all different interpretations of that word, and it's always motion. And that's what the creation story talks about, which is when Anishinaabe was birthed, our creation story says that we were set into motion. And that motion's never stopped, and it's true, because just look under a microscope at any of our cells and we are molecules that never stop moving. So we are in motion. That's what breath is, and that's what I'm doing right now. You know, we're in this constant series of motion. That means that our job is to move with the Spirit. Our job is to do the work with the Spirit, and that's what writing is. That's what ceremony is. That's what raising our children is. I mean, there's nothing that reminds you of motion more than like having a toddler. I mean, your whole life is just motion, you know what I mean? And so, like, and every part of that is about either you can either go with the flow of creation, or you can go against the flow of creation. And that oftentimes creates a whole lot of different challenges, because anyone knows going upstream, you don't get very far, and it's very challenging. It takes a lot of energy. But when you go with the stream, man, do you go far? Like, do you ever go a far distance? And so there's different ways that you can move with creation, and sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's easy. And that's what I kind of think about writing, and that's I also think about everything in Anishinaabe is a very tangible material. You know, how are we going to build a lodge today? But we also have to do all of these things to be kind, so that we make sure that there can be lodges in the future, and that we contribute to making that lodge. But the rule of the lodge is that you have to, if you're going to be in the lodge, you have to help build the lodge. That's an actual rule, right? The rule is that if you have to put your hand on the work. You have to do the work. And that's what being an Anishinaabe is all about. It's about constant motion, constant change, constant growth. And that's really what I think writing does. Writing not only does that for us as writers, but then also for those who read and those who then write as a result of reading our writing. And then we read their writing, and the process of gift giving goes back and forth in perpetuity. I don't even know if that answered it in any single way at all, but there you go. That was great. Because there you go, I'll stop there.
I think my book is the thinnest on that pile there, which is I'm okay with. But when I thought of writing the book, it was because of the great people at Great Plains Publishing. Mel particularly, she called me and asked for coffee, and I went to meet her, and she said, I think it'd be a good time for you to write a book. And I didn't think so. And in the conversation, she said, I think you've done a lot in this short time. And I think people would benefit from reading your book and understanding what it's like to come from the north and to do all these things that you've done. And so I agreed at that point. And it was one of the most grueling processes that I've ever been through, writing a book, especially with the 5 edits, and you still find a mistake afterwards. Like, oh. But, you know, my motivation afterwards for writing it and then releasing it and letting it go was to try and bridge understanding between people that didn't grow up in the north, that didn't grow up in the same spirituality spaces that I did, in hopes that people understand that, you know, we all come from the same thing, that we all want the same things for our families, that we all want to succeed, we all want to be safe, we all want to do good things for our children. But it was definitely a healing process in writing it. I cried many times throughout the process, and thankfully it was during COVID, so I was by myself a lot. But I cried throughout because I talked a lot about the domestic abuse and violence that I've been through in my life from my children's father. And, you know, I did grow up privileged, and I did feel like we didn't want for anything, that we were well taken care of. And I had no business being in an abusive relationship, but somehow I ended up in an abusive relationship. And I survived a few times of almost, you know, not being here with all of you. And I had to make peace with that. But also I had to make peace with my ex, because, you know, I forgave him a long time ago. And even though he's never apologized, really, and I feel sorry for him more than anything. He's a victim of many things that have happened in our lives and our people's lives. He's a victim still today. And I'm glad that we're not in a relationship together anymore, but I have 2 beautiful children that came out of the situation and the process. And I got really strong from it. You know, when I was getting away from him, I went through the women's shelter system. First through Thompson, then into Brandon, to Winnipeg, and then to Brandon, where I settled and raised my kids in Brandon for a while. But it was hard, and then coming here and trying to establish myself and following, you know, what Creator had for me and what Creator was asking me to do. I think I try to capture that as much as I could, to the truest way that I could. And I have to say also that, you know, my dad and my mom were strong Christians, the evangelical weird kind. And I'm okay with saying that now. For a time, though, that I was shy, but also scared to say that, because people were ridiculing that. And I had to make peace with that. I've made peace with you know, the things that I have gone through, but I also understand and recognize that my reactions to the world and my reaction in the things that are stuck in my head and my psyche and my heart and the things I do and say are because of the experiences that we all go through as individuals. And I hope that when people read it, they'll understand a level of humanity that comes from our region. You know, Elijah Harper, I probably wear his T-shirt every once in a while. Somebody asked me about this T-shirt. He grew up the same way I did. Him and his dad and my dad were good friends, and they grew up in the Christian way, but also grew up in acknowledging the Indigenous way. And now I'm here with that. You know, there are still Christians that believe that, a Bible should never be covered in hide, that it's evil. And I know that people think that. And that we should never be participating in sweat lodges. But I also know people that follow the spiritual way that say that, anything to do with Christianity is evil. So there's all of these things and all of these thoughts that that we're constantly hit with, and I hope that people, we as people start to realize that we are all the same at the end of the day and at the end of our lives. What Creator has given us is something that we have to answer for and to be okay with, and I'm okay with where I am, and this medallion is partly because of my father, my Christian father. He wanted these flowers commissioned for his own jacket. He wanted a jacket for one of my sisters to get married, and when he passed away and we were looking for a logo for one of my leadership runs, this is what we, together, my family and I, came up with, and I proudly wear it now because I embrace the teachings of life and where I am now.
Miigwech, thank you, each of you, for sharing so deeply and so personally. Looking at the time here, there's so much more that we can talk about, but can we give some love to these speakers for sharing? That was a lot of love. I felt that. I hope you felt that love. So we do have a few minutes if folks in the audience have questions. I believe there are mic runners, so if you just raise your hand, someone will come to you.
Hi, I teach some of the early childhood education courses here at the University of Winnipeg. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on children and how to do Indigenous education in a good way for them. Thank you.
Little babies. I think about kids a lot too. I'm surrounded by them. And in a previous life, I also was an early childhood educator. Well, this life, just many years ago. There's lots of different ways, I think, for teachers and non-Indigenous folks and Indigenous folks to bring it into the classroom or the care center. We are really blessed right now with so much amazing Indigenous literature. There are picture books about absolutely everything. And when I was teaching, I think I stopped teaching in 2010, it was not like that. There was a very limited kind of pool to draw from. So I think we, and I'm a bit of a fan of books. So there's so many different things and so many topics that you can look up, and amazing illustrators and writers that are really interested in not only teaching, but like the engagement part, the rhyming part. And I can think of 1,000 examples that can fulfill that. And I mean, I do think our elders are often so overworked but also whenever possible, the mode to go about it in a classroom is to offer tobacco to an elder, offer tobacco and a really nice paycheck. Because just those teachings and those sharings are absolutely invaluable, and I don't know a single child, no matter what their challenge, who doesn't want to hang out and listen to stories or bring out that drum. There's something magical that happens in the drum. The most hyperactive child can calm with the drum, or get riled up and play along and learn the drum, which is equally of cool value. But there's lots of ways that we are blessed with an amazing community here, and there's so many resources to draw from, and so many amazing people to, again, pay well and bring in.
was that? Yeah. all I was going to add to that is everything that she said, but also to teach yourself so you're comfortable with it, and that kids don't feel hesitation in any way to learn it. I was talking to a group of, I think, grade 4 and 5 kids online one time, and my little grandson was with me, and I have a drum in the back of on my wall where my camera was like this, and the kids were asking me what that drum is. And then my grandson came up naturally and grabbed it and started banging it, and I said to them, and I realized at that moment, not that long ago, that he's the first one in our family to have any access to this kind of cultural item in our home, and so the value of that is important. And if you know the history of what happened to people, I think that'll help you a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate all of the great education and responsibility we all have to take that into our lives and talk. As a non-Indigenous person, I have the privilege of being the director of Makusag Intergenerational Children's Center at 527 Selkirk Avenue. I'm very proud to say that we do have our drums, we do have that ability to gift back to our children. But we also need to work with our province, the early learning and childcare sector, and thinking about that colonial system. Is there any type of words or process that you see as a way forward, working within the policy creation and the abilities that we can go forward in a good way with a colonial system?
Sounds like you.
Sorry, dealing with the colonial system? Is that what you're... Okay.
Our funding is through the province, and we work with the funding that we're given, but our center is very specific to supporting post-secondary institutes in the North End. So our families are coming from situations of intergenerational trauma. Our Indigenous staff are coming from intergenerational trauma as well. And for them to be able to have those extra supports and resources, we can only do so much with our funding. How do we solidify some of the policies within the Seventh Sacred teaching within
I'm being looked at. So this is the reality. Like, the reality is that we have all this work to do, and we have a tremendous series of challenges in front of us. And so I'm going to use a different example, and hopefully this helps you. So I think that it's not going to be very popular or perhaps votable, or if you have somebody come out to go, we need to deal with issues of poverty in the North End, and the solution to that is rerouting money for the police. Because here's a fact, that the Mama Bear Clan, or the Bear Clan, or Initiative, or any of the groups that I've worked with for quite a while in the patrols in the North End, do more work to save lives than the average police officer. And here's what I mean by that, is that violence isn't solved by a guy with a gun. Violence is maybe staved off, or maybe delayed, or maybe subverted, but the reality is that we don't deal with the root cause. It's because the problem is that our institutions work reactively, they don't work proactively. Like, for example, what will keep kids out of the child welfare system will never be removing them from families ever, period. But pancake breakfasts will. So will weekends with your parents. What I mean by that is doing fun activities with your parents that can help you build relationships. So is learning the language, right? So there is all of these ways that systems don't work because they're inherently reactive. And I think that funding is based most in this kind of model, is that we have so many challenges and issues, and what ends up happening is that governments, it doesn't matter if it's a provincial, federal, or tribal government, it really doesn't matter. You're constantly in a series of reacting because problems work and build up over time. And so governments are in reactive positions, and that's understandable, that's right. What you need is bravery, and that doesn't happen overnight. So that's gotta be with relationships, that's gotta be with understanding the specifics around the challenges of the issue, and then coming to an understanding that the only way we're ever gonna fix poverty, homelessness, addictions is through proactive means. Like, for example, I'll give you one more example. So no one will ever leave a tent to go to a house if that house is a supervised place where they feel that it's draconian controlled, it's full of judgment, it's full of you have to sit and wait for a sermon in order to get a sandwich. Like, that's BS. That is colonialism 101 and racism 101. And yes, a tent is 100 times better than a place that you are expected to sit and wait for a sermon before you get a sandwich. And that was basically Winnipeg's downtown for decades, because I worked there. And I was there and witnessed, and I actually worked for an organization that did that, unfortunately. But the reality is that only changes with time, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so it doesn't happen overnight. And that's not an answer that's very happy. But I'll give you, the reality is that it would take 2 police officers to fund the Mama Bear Clan for a year. And we would save more lives, or as many lives at least, that the Winnipeg Police Service does. And I've seen it. I've seen it because not only did we used to walk 3 times a week, but we interrupted domestic disturbances, we walked kids home, we gave sandwiches to encampments to give healthy and, so that people would stay out of emergency rooms. We connected people up with employment services. We let people use our phones so they could tell their families that they're still alive and they're okay and that they're in a safe place. That's the kind of basic services that we need, and that's what proactivity looks like. Because that stuff will save stuff more than taking people continually to the emergency room or the jail, which is generally what the cops do. And I'm not judging the cops. Do I say that we need cops? Of course I would. Of course there are situations where you need police officers. But we do not need police officers who are incapable of dealing with the huge bulk of challenges that our community has to deal with everything, because they're just not capable. Even the mayor agrees now that we need a mental health service that's separate. And that's now the vision of proactivity, because mental health services will be what solves this city's challenges of poverty, never police. And I apologize for getting soapboxy, but my point of your answer is that it's going to take conversations and talking about what your proactivity, and unfortunately it's going to involve some articulation from services like yourself, but I work with a lot of child welfare agencies. It takes a whole heap of people to try to argue that we need to stop dealing with child welfare reactively and be proactive. And it's through demonstration, it's through, it's through case studies, it's through research, it's through all of these narratives, Through relationship building, yeah, those kinds of things. So hope that was helpful. I don't know.
Miigwech. We have got time for one more question. All the questions are on this side of the room tonight.
Anine Boujou. In terms of representation and perspective, what advice do you have for Indigenous peoples in colonial spaces as we are moving to create Indigenous perspective and representation in colonial spaces? Miigwech.
I like what Minister Nahani said one time at a Kanichik dinner. I say Kanichik, but everyone says Kanichik. It's funner to say that way. But she said one time at the end of the night, which kind of surprised me, because it was all lovely folks, like nice elders and moms and all that. Anyway, she said at the end of her speech, take up space wherever the F you want. But she said the whole word. because she's braver than me. But I say that, and I also say take up every opportunity that you're presented with. And so what if you fail? You'll still learn something from it. And so what if people don't believe you? I became a Grand Chief even doubting myself, and ran in elections even doubting myself. But I did it anyway because I think we have to take up those spaces because other people are not there yet and not brave enough yet. And sometimes we have to throw ourselves up as examples of what could be done. I go to lots of different places now, and lots of young Indigenous women ask me, how or why I did that, and did whatever they think that something cool that they think I did. And they feel braver. Even the very first day when I was Grand Chief, and we were having a ceremony, swearing-in ceremony, the female counselors came behind me and sat with me and said this was the first time they felt included or felt to be a part of a circle. And so that happens when you just stick your neck out and be brave. And even if you feel inadequate, even if people say you're inadequate, I think we still have to be brave and to be true to ourselves, because only you know what Creator is telling you to do.
So on that beautiful note, can we show our gratitude one more time with another round of applause? So if you didn't get to ask your question, we're going to move things over to another room for a reception, so you can come and chat and hang out. I'd like to invite Josh back up for some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Chantal. It's very terrific. Thank you so much again. Really wonderful that you're here. Sheila, thank you so much, Katherena. Really meaningful. There were so many interesting concepts explored. That was fascinating. I love many of the connections that you made to faith and community and Indigenous teachings. Really kind of blew me away. Some of the things that you had mentioned, I had never even thought of before. What it reminded me is how little I know and how much I need to learn. There is still a lot of learning that needs to happen. We have a long way yet to go. And I think that's the important thing about these kinds of moments when we get together and we explore these kinds of teachings from different communities. And then also exploring where faith and politics connect. I've got an interesting story. I'm going to wrap this up pretty quick, but the other day I was driving in my car in Ottawa, and there was a politician on the radio, and he was talking about how if a kid is hungry, give him a glass of milk and a banana and some bannock, and it'll be easier for the kid to learn. And I thought, wow, that's a really cool politician. They must be a social democrat. But then I also thought to myself, wow, that's a really cool Christian gospel kind of concept to feed people when they're hungry, to take care of people. But it's also fascinating to know that that is not just a Christian concept. That is a concept that many, many faiths all over the world have. And I guess that's the whole point, is that we can learn from each other and find out how we're so much more similar to each other. So thank you all so much. As was alluded to, there is a reception happening in the room just adjacent. Please join us for more conversation. I'd also like to thank our partners tonight, the United Steelworkers, the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, the United Food and Commercial Workers, the Canadian Teachers Federation, AMAPSIO, Cavan, and Molson Coors. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here tonight. Please tell your friends about the foundation. If you are interested, this foundation is completely funded independently. If you would like to become a member, the invitation is open to you. And I'd like to close by saying thank you once again to the University of Winnipeg for hosting us. Thank you to the staff. Thank you to the tech staff. Thank you to everyone who helped make this event happen. We are truly grateful and honored to be here. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to talking with you more at the reception. Good night.